I'm Summer Lee, advocate for social justice, plus soon to be the first Black woman from Western Pennsylvania elected to the Pennsylvania State House.
I'm Bob Bland, entrepreneur, activist, and co-founder of the 5 Million Strong Women's March on Washington.
And I'm Matt McDermott, Democratic pollster, communication strategist, and member of the LGBT Victory Fund.
And I'm Tamika Mallory, co-president of the Women's March, along with Bob Bland, and a proud freedom fighter. Join us on Manhattan Neighborhood Network and Free Speech TV's America's Midterms, The Blue Wave, as we break down progressive races, talk issues, and meet the candidates. On tonight's show, we'll meet the woman aiming to kick GOP Congressman Peter King out of the House, Long Island's own Luba Gretchen Shirley. Also, a progressive warrior, young, fearless, and fed up with Republican BS, Gabriel A. Severo. Maryland State House today, the White House tomorrow. Trump, I know you're watching, so calm your Twitter fingers. Everybody buckle up, because the paid protesters have our very own show. Here comes the most dangerous political talk on TV. Welcome back. Till Election Day, this is home base for the latest in progressive politics. Now with the twist, we have a new co-host, Summer Lee. Welcome, Summer.
Thank y'all. I am excited to be here.
Excited to have you.
Matt, we always turn into you. What's it looking like out there? We have just a little under a month before the election. What are we going to do? Does it even matter that there's an accused assaulter now on the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so really important, and I think we've got a lot of new numbers out this week that we could talk about tonight. First, a CNN poll out this week has 3 pieces of really important information. One, Trump's approval rating is still at 41%, where it's been for the better part of 2 years now. 2, Democrats continue to lead in the generic ballot. It's up to 14 points in the CNN poll. And 3, I think there's some really important implications about Democratic enthusiasm. I think there were some concerns after the Kavanaugh confirmation that Republicans were motivated, that Democrats were motivated, and it was sort of going to come to a head nationally. I think what we're seeing is actually Democrats are increasingly motivated, Republicans less so. And so I think what we're going to see over the next few weeks is Democrats continuing to knock those doors, raising that money,
I want to push
and
back
winning
on
in November.
that, actually, because what I've heard is that the Republicans, they just had a big win this week with Kavanaugh coming to the Supreme Court. And everyone knows that conservatives are really into our courts. So I feel like this might actually start even a new wave of enthusiasm among Republicans. Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, and so we actually haven't, and that's, I think, the good sign.
Really?
We've seen in the CNN poll, for instance, Democrats are up 7 points on enthusiasm, and Republicans are flat. I think the other really important thing that we can talk about tonight is we see in that same poll that voters still believe after this election that Republicans are going to control both houses of Congress. And to me, that's really important because it suggests that Democratic voters aren't apathetic, that they're going to be mobilized heading into the election, that they're not going to stay home because they think Democrats already have this in the bag.
But we know that Trumpsters they're energized right now. They have been using this Kavanaugh situation to mobilize their base. They're using it to get people out for Republican candidates down ballot.
Well, I know it because if you check my Twitter feed and my Facebook feed, the death threats that I'm receiving and the hate is, really, especially after the Kavanaugh confirmation, you had so many people going to social media to say, like, we beat you, we won. And it definitely, and it was almost, it was very quiet, scary beforehand. And then right after, it was almost like, hey, we got our guy. So I'm not sure that they won't be motivated. But what I do know is that the Dems better not play games. We cannot fumble the ball on this.
And we need to have a really strong field game because people like Heidi Heitkamp, for instance, in North Dakota, is now even more vulnerable than she already is. So I remember Elizabeth Warren last week when we were all in Washington together said, hey, here's the agenda. We're going to win the House. We're going to win the Senate. But I think it's important for voters to know that the Senate is very much going to be a hard win for us. You know, the House, it looks like it's going to be a landslide. What do you think about the Senate?
Yeah, and that's my takeaway from last week is we had a lot of Democratic senators make some very important decisions in their vote against Kavanaugh. And we as voters and we as activists, I think, need to recognize our importance in this equation, which is that we need to be knocking those doors. We need to be raising money for these candidates because they made an incredibly important decision that's going to affect them at the ballot box, and we need to be there to back them up.
But realistically, some of these seats aren't coming up for 2 years, for 4 years.
Right.
We have a short collective memory. So how do we keep
But we
Democrats?
have more time to work. And I think you mentioned activists.
And we're not going to forget.
And I made a joke earlier that the paid protesters have our own show. And it's pretty funny, but, and it's really because there's been this talk about us as protesters being paid, which is not true. The reality
organizers
is that
are paid. Like, if you're an organizer, you're paid.
and
it's a
you
job.
should be. I think all activists, for the work that we do, getting up early in the morning and being out there doing the work on behalf of all Americans, we should be paid. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who are going broke. They are literally starting GoFundMe campaigns to be able to travel
I completely
across
understand.
the country.
I'm running for office and basically doing organizing work at the same time on issues that we were working on before I started running.
Right.
I don't get paid for those things. I don't know what anybody's talking
I
about.
work with my clients
I want to
every
go back
day.
to your earlier point because I think this is important for viewers to understand. We talk things like, Susan Collins is up in 2 years. What can we do between now and then? We actually have Senate races in the next 3 weeks.
Right. That's right.
Among people who voted for Kavanaugh, Dean Heller in Nevada is the perfect example. So there are things voters and activists can be doing right now.
Preach, Matt. Preach.
So
Come on, preach.
where are we
run
sending
against these candidates.
activists? So we got ground folk all over the country. Where should we be sending them to?
Yeah, so that's a great question. If you're in California watching this right now, you should be going to Nevada and Arizona. If you're in New York right now, you should be going to congressional districts in New Jersey and upstate New York. Even if you live in a blue state, there are things that you can be doing right now to make sure that Democrats not only win the House, but the Senate.
But Summer, what are we going to do about our people, about black folks and brown folks who are like, we're not feeling it. No one's speaking to our issues. They're not on the ground because everyone is progressive. Progressive is the
It's a word.
It's a word
to us.
the trend word is progressive. But it's not really true for some of these candidates.
I think this is something that we can talk about right now, but this is a long-term strategy. We're looking at 2018, but we need to be looking at 2019, 2020.
Right.
Are we supporting, creating pipelines, organizing, candidates who understand, who experience life the way that that our people are experiencing it, who understand our perspective, because that's something that we have to offer. But we have to make sure that we are being intentional about finding these people, planting seeds, because there are a lot of us who don't know that we should run.
Right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Listen, I hate to break this up. This is such a great conversation, but we're going to have to do that. Storming the State House, Maryland candidate Gabriel A. Severo, a young political activist turned progressive politician. That's next.
I was raised on the principle that you aren't fit to lead if you first aren't prepared to serve. And that's exactly the work that I've been engaged in, service.
Welcome back. The war to take back America starts with men like this. Our next guest, Gabriel A. Severo, strong Trinidadian roots with that good old American muscle. Gabe is running for the legislature in Maryland, a fighter for social and economic reform, and a staunch opponent of almost everything President Trump stands for. My kind of guy. Welcome, Gabriel. What are the issues in Montgomery County, and how are you going to win on them?
Look, Maryland is a microcosm of what we're seeing nationally. Gross income inequality. We're seeing that wages are stagnant. LGBTQ rights are being eroded. We're also seeing regressive tax policies. And I think it's time for states to lead on a number of these progressive issues, especially when we're looking at a divisive Congress that's not really getting things done on all these fronts. And so I decided to run because I recognize that there is an opportunity for us to make advances on these issues at the state level, and we could show the rest of the nation that this is possible.
Thanks, Gabriel. What would you say is the one issue that voters are most concerned about this fall?
I would say Medicare for all. I think we are seeing a lot of frustrated Americans who one, know that we can provide healthcare to every single person that lives in this country, but the political will isn't there. When I was door knocking, I was hearing a lot about deductibles and the expenses that folks have to pay in order to take care of their family members and to take care of themselves, and having to choose between a prescription or covering rent or food or ensuring that there's a roof over your head. So Medicare for all is really something that my constituents care deeply about, and what we've seen from the data, a lot of Marylanders and Americans care about.
So Gabe, you're a man of color running on a bold platform of immigration reform. How is your district reacting to Trump and all of this regressive crap coming out of the White House and from the right?
Yeah, well, my district and my candidacy is an indictment of the Trump administration and their policies. District 39 in Maryland is one of the most diverse districts in the state and in the country, quite literally. Women make up the majority. People of color make up the majority. We have a high Muslim and immigrant population.
So you would say that race does play a major role in what is happening there?
Absolutely, absolutely. Maryland has the highest population of African Americans outside of the Deep South. We still have issues with mass incarceration. We still have issues around racial inequities. And I'm hoping that, with my candidacy, that we can not only highlight these issues, but when elected, we could enact the kind of policies and legislation that change the kind of equities that we see in our system, from education to the prison industrial complex.
Gabriel, to that point, I wanted to ask you, obviously you're running in Maryland. It's one of the few blue states this year where a Republican incumbent is running for governor, has a very good chance of getting reelected. How do you propose, assuming you get elected, working in a Democratic legislature with a Republican governor that may be reelected this year as well?
Well, I'm very optimistic. I think Ben Jealous
is going to win. That's right.
That's good answer.
That's right. Good answer. That's right.
We'll make that
I was praying for you. I was praying for you, Gabriel.
Right. We don't need that negativity on a Wednesday morning.
That's
right.
That's right.
But I think Ben Jealous is going to pull this off. And what we're seeing, recent polls have shown that Ben Jealous's message, a lot of what I've been talking about, and folks like Summer Lee over in Pennsylvania has been talking about, is a real populist progressive message. And that is resonating with Marylanders across our state. And once we know that the message is resonating, then it is easy for folks to show up to the polls and for them to vote for the candidate that's speaking to those issues.
Well, speaking of showing up to the polls, sorry to cut you off, but we want to make sure you get all your talking points in today. The Kavanaugh thing was clearly, we were out protesting, a lot of people upset about that. Is that resonating with your voters? You think people really care about that on the ground there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've been talking about it. Ben Jealous has been talking about it. Our governor, Larry Hogan, has really abdicated his moral responsibility about taking a stand on this issue. When approached and questioned about the Kavanaugh nomination, he said that he wasn't educated enough in order to provide an opinion. And we know that you don't need to be educated enough in order to believe survivors and in order to agree that this rape culture that currently exists in our society needs to be dismantled, including patriarchy. And we also need to be talking about how we can create safe spaces and teach more people, both men and women, about consent.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
So Gabriel, you're young. You have this incredible background as a community organizer, and I see you've got a DSA pin on. What do your opponents have to say about your Democratic Socialist background?
Well, we're speaking to the issues. I think what we've seen in the campaign has been some red baiting, but we're speaking to the issues that matter most to working families. I come from a working poor background, being Afro-Latinx, being LGBTQ, being an immigrant myself. We're talking to the issues that matter to my district. And so, we can get into this ideological conversation, but at the end of the day, the Democratic Socialists of America are speaking to the issues that working people care about most, and it's time that we center those voices, and that's exactly what I'll do when elected.
And Gabriel, you have immigration roots. How is immigration policy affecting your district?
So one of the issues that I'm hoping to work on next session that we haven't seen any traction on over the past 4 years because of our Republican governor is the Maryland Trust Act. We have always been a welcoming community. I'm proud to have been an organizer that made the Maryland Dream Act possible when it failed at the federal level. But we still have a lot of work to do around immigration, ensuring that immigrant families feel safe in Maryland. And the Maryland Trust Act is one of my priorities. And that, in essence, is ensuring that we're not cooperating with ICE and we're not terrorizing people and creating that distance between law enforcement and the broader communities that they serve.
Gabriel, I want to ask you as we start to wrap up. Obviously, you are a game-changing candidate, not only in this district but in this state. you are representing voices and diversity that this district and the state haven't seen. You're obviously Afro-Latino, you are an openly gay man. Why is it important, and I think this is one of the most interesting things of this year, why is it important for voters when they go to the polls in November to see candidates like you on the ballot, candidates that are talking and look like candidates they haven't seen before?
And he's also saying he's a community organizer.
That's right,
which is clearly important.
Yeah, organizers do it better.
Right.
Organizers do it better than politicians ever will.
So Gabriel, I think President Trump is watching us because he's been tweeting about the paid protesters all weekend. What do you want to say to him? What would you want him to hear right now?
Well, protesting is a form of civic engagement. That is how we show our dissatisfaction with our government. What I have to say to him is that we're ready. We're organizing and coming.
Thank you so much, Gabriel.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, this lady's really got something. She's going after a king. Meet the progressive taking on one of the GOP's most powerful characters. That's next.
It's time to let politicians like Peter King know enough is enough. This time, it's personal.
You want to see progressive power? Look no further than our next guest, Luba Gretchen Shirley. This progressive woman is battling one of the most powerful Republican men in Congress, Long Island's Peter King. King's a GOP flamethrower with a dismal record on progressive issues, solidly in the Sean Hannity echo chamber of lies and half-truths. But here comes change. From New York's Long Island, please welcome Luba Gretchen Shirley. Welcome, Luba. America has had enough of your opponent. I certainly have. Why is he so bad for our country and for your district?
He has voted against paid family leave. He has voted against equal pay for women for equal work. He is against a woman's right to choose, even in the cases of rape or incest, and wants to jail doctors who perform abortion. He votes to gut the Environmental Protection Agency. He has a terrible record, and he has only gotten away with it because there hasn't been a serious fight in a really long time.
Luba, I want to ask you about that specifically. You're obviously in a really curious district in the country, voted for Barack Obama, have voted for a few different Democratic presidential candidates, and then swung to Trump in 2016. How are you running in that district and talking to voters who have voted for both Democrats and Republicans in the past?
We're not focused on Donald Trump. We're not focused on Republicans versus Democrats. I'm talking about the issues. And people are really fired up because we're talking to them about how all of these issues affect their bottom line.
Yeah.
People are struggling in our district. We've knocked on tens of thousands of doors, and the top 4 issues that I consistently hear: healthcare, taxes, education, and the environment.
And Luba, speaking of healthcare and taxes and all of this, it sounds like people in your district are really concerned with economics, and your FEC win for paid childcare for working class candidates had a national effect across the nation. So do you think it'll mobilize women voters to the polls?
I do. We've already seen women in 8 different states put in similar requests at the state level, and this is an issue that I hear about from men, from women, from Democrats, from Republicans that said, thank you for standing up and talking about these issues. Because when we have more parents in office, we'll have the conversation about how you have quality, affordable childcare for all children.
Yeah.
And
as a working mother, I want to thank you.
So Luba, looking at the district, how much of this is about race? Is the district made up of people who are all Archie Bunker types who moved out there to get away from, mixed race New York City?
Long Island is very segregated. We have about 20% Latinos in the district, 10% Black people, 70% white, and it's very segregated. And there's a history of racial segregation on Long Island. There's a history of redlining. There's a history of underfunding our public schools and not equitably funding our schools. And these are conversations that we need to have, and that for a long time, our representative, Peter King, has not been having those conversations, has not been meeting with different members of the community from across the district.
Well, I actually have several family members in Hempstead, and I know that there is a lot of violence that happens in that particular area. Do you have any, is your platform reaching into that particular issue?
Violence? Yeah, I mean, this is something we need to make sure that we have that we have better support for our communities, for our children, that we have after-school programs, that we have job trainings and skills trainings, that we have the parents can actually make ends meet with a good job so that they're not working 3 jobs and their children do not have parents at home. We need to make sure that we are strengthening our economy and strengthening our families.
Right.
And that's, I mean, there are a lot of people who literally work 3 jobs and don't see their kids because they're trying to make ends meet.
So Luba, we just want to keep you right there on the balance issue. Trump and King would have us all believe that this MS-13 thing is in Long Island is getting worse. Is that the case? Is it really as big as a problem as they're making it out to be? And if so, what would you do about it?
MS-13 is the big problem. And, I'm raising my children here. I'm very concerned about the security of our communities. There are multiple steps in terms of combating MS-13. One, we need to make sure that we have the federal dollars, that we are giving the resources needed to law enforcement in our district to actually combat the MS-13 crisis, that we have funding for programs, for after-school programs and job trainings programs to get to the children before the gangs do. But we need comprehensive immigration reform. It will be the biggest help to police officers. We have 7,100 TPS recipients in our district, temporary participant status.
Yeah.
It's the largest portion of TPS recipients in any congressional district across the country. And the immigrant population in our community is the #1 preyed on by MS-13.
Yeah.
So if you take a large portion of the district and you make them have to live in the shadows, and they're now afraid to talk to the police officers because they're afraid they're going to be deported, they're not going to report on crimes that MS-13 is committing.
I'm hearing you talk about these issues, and I want to make sure that I challenge you to, in addition to giving funding to law enforcement, you must be in touch with the organized groups on the ground there in these areas. When you talk about violence, focusing specifically on law enforcement is a bad strategy that we've seen over and over again. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what's at stake. We know there's a lot happening there, and we believe in you.
You have to work with the organizations in the community already. There's Strong Youth, there's the Council of Unity.
Yep.
They need the resources just as much as law enforcement does. And I was trying to mention that earlier, but it's critical. These organizations are providing jobs training, skills trainings, after-school programs for the children.
That's right.
Yeah.
Fall into the hands of the gangs. And this should not be a partisan issue. This needs to be something that we are working across the aisle to combat, to make sure that our children are safe.
We've got about 1 minute. Tell us what's at stake there for you.
This is American values are at stake.
Yeah.
Do we value
That's right.
or do we value profits of corporate executives?
Yeah.
This is something that we need to be fighting to make sure that everyone, no matter their race, gender, sexual identity, or income levels, have a fair shot.
We just want to wrap up really quickly. President Trump is watching. What do you have to say to him?
Not giving tax cuts to corporations in the top 1%. We need somebody who's a real fighter for working Americans.
Well, we think that's you, Luba. Good luck. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Luba.
Coming up, we'll wrap up. We'll give you our thoughts on Gabriel and Luba. We'll give you a preview of next week's show. And Matt is going to tell us the numbers. What's trending? What's at stake? What are we doing here, Matt? Welcome back. So what's the verdict, y'all? Like, Gabriel, he looks like he could be a shoo-in, but Luba, I don't know. She has a fight of, her hands are full.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think we've now seen this last week. We're seeing it again this week. Candidates who are running in districts that traditionally haven't been represented by a Democrat amongst a voting population that hasn't heard from Democrats in a very long time. So these are hard fights, but they're important fights for us.
Right, but I mean, I hope that she doesn't make the mistake, Luba, in Long Island of only talking to the same people who vote all the time, because I'm telling you, the folks in Hempstead, where my family members live, I'm gonna get on the phone and call them. Have you heard of Luba? You know?
I will say the thing that I took away that was really positive is that both of these candidates, like a lot of other candidates nationally, are talking about how all of these issues are interconnected. They're really trying, they're not like canning these speeches, they're not only talking about certain issues that are attractive in one area, but they're out talking to people, they're relating to people, they are living the experience.
I'm going to be very honest because, it's not no permanent friends, just permanent interests. And she scared me talking about law enforcement off the bat when we asked about violence. The fact that she brought up law enforcement is very scary for me because that is a failed strategy. We've seen it over and over again.
Literally, Black and brown people are dying.
That's
we
right.
can't have people on the fence about this one.
Something called the crisis management system in New York City that I helped to start, along with Erica Ford, who's an anti-violence expert, and A.T. Mitchell out of Brooklyn. And you know what? There is a program there that does this work, and she needs to really go to them. So you know we're going to be in touch. Bob, it's your job. Go tell her.
Oh, you got it. Because, I think what we're seeing here is that representation really does matter.
That's right.
And so we're seeing that when white women run for office, that oftentimes we're running on white issues and not on all the issues.
Right. We got to support her, though. You know, I mean, she needs to. We need to.
No talk,
let
like
her
this is
know.
all action now.
That's right.
I wake up every morning, and I hope everyone at home does so as well, and ask myself every morning, what am I doing to make sure Democrats are elected across the country in 3 weeks? So whether you're making phone calls to people who live in those districts, whether you're sending postcards, whether you're canvassing door to door, every single day, if you want to see donate. If you want to see a House and Senate that reflects us and reflects progressives, you need to be out there doing the work because it's no longer enough just to vote in these elections.
And there are a few registration dates that are still open, so I think folks need to rush October 15th.
Yeah, Friday in New York.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's so much of it, right, is just actually getting there. So it's not just about being registered and checking. There's been a lot of voter purges this year. There's been a lot of suppression. So we also need to go in groups to the polls and make sure that we're there as witnesses and that we're able to back up our friends and make sure that they make it all the way to the polls.
Look at this. We've got Bob out here talking about voter suppression. Like the Women's March has done a good job here.
Lives, people.
No, and look, I think it's an important point because ultimately we can talk about polls till the end of time. Democrats are looking good in the polls. Democrats look like they're going to have a chance at winning back the House, and they have a lot of contested Senate races. That's not possible if people aren't on the ground doing the work to make sure they're elected.
That's our week.
Congressmen, congresswomen, senators across the country are now back in their home districts. They're talking to voters. They're knocking on doors. We need to be doing the same thing as voters and activists. They're out there talking to voters, and if we are not here to amplify that message, we're not going to have the wins in November that we need to have.
And what are the key districts or the key states that people should be focusing on?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And if you're here watching from a blue state, you have an important role to play in this election as well. So in states like Nevada and states like Arizona, if you're living in California, that's a 2 or 3 hour drive. That's something that you can do this weekend to make a difference in states that matter. And so whether it's the desert Southwest, on the East Coast, if you're in New York, you should be going to congressional districts in New Jersey and upstate New York, places where Democrats have a chance for the first time in a long time and can ultimately win those districts and win back the House.
All right, listen, we're going to have to wrap it up. It was such a good show, folks. I'm so happy to be here with you all talking about these races. You know, next week we're going to be coming back. We're going to talk about all these local races happening across the country, the latest in the news, and we're going to hear more from candidates with the courage to stand up and fight the GOP agenda. Till then, keep the struggle alive. From Summer, Bob, and Matt. Good night, America.